Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. I'd like to give a warm welcome to Reverend Dr. Sandor Kovacs for being here with us tonight. We're so glad that you are here sharing this wonderful history with us. Sandor is the Associate Professor of History at the Unitarian Seminary in Kovacs, Transylvania. And he is currently the professor in residence at Star King School for the Ministry in Berkeley, California this semester, where he has been for the last 3 or 4 weeks, enjoying the warmth of California, and then he braved his first visit to the Midwest to be with us this week. His wife is a radio broadcaster, and his son is in the 11th grade back home in school. And this is his 3rd trip to the United States. He was one of the very first scholars to come and study in the U.S. in the early 1990s. He has been to California, to Washington State, and to New York, and as I mentioned, this is his first foray into the Midwest. So we're glad to extend him the warmth of a Minnesota welcome. We can't offer you warm weather. He also has been a translator for some of our Unity pilgrims on past trips to Transylvania. And he's been active in the Partner Church Council and the International Council of Unitarians and Universalists. He'll be leading 2 talks here at Unity, one tonight, and also one on Saturday at 10 a.m., also here in the Foot Room. And the talk on Saturday is the development of Unitarianism in Transylvania in the 16th century. He'll also be lecturing at the university this week and preaching at Unity on Sunday. So we are delighted to have you and welcome. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Very pleased and moved that so many of you showed up for this evening lecture. So if you fell asleep, that won't be a problem. I'm used to it. My students after the very first 10 minutes. So don't worry about it. I thought that I will present you a whole history of our connections with English-speaking dissenters. And then I realized that if I will go in details and I try to present the 16th and 17th century, then I will not come to an end of my talk. And then I decided that I will talk and focus more on our American connections. So I will try to do that on the, let's say, next 40 minutes. I hope that that would be that would be enough. Okay, this is a book written by myself, and that was basically my PhD. The title would be Hungarian English Unitarian Connections in the 19th Century. It's quite thick. I researched a lot. I would not talk about the British connections. I will mention just one thing, that the so-called official connections started in 1821, when the secretary of the British and Foreigner Unitarian Association, William Johnson Fox, sent a letter to the consistory of the Unitarian Church in Transylvania. The letter was written in Latin, and actually it's a pamphlet, a printed pamphlet. And its title was A Brief Exposition of the History, Fate, and Present Status of the Unitarians Living in England. You have there the Latin title too. I could not translate it better. It's interesting that this pamphlet is missing from the shelves of the major British libraries. However, we have quite a few copies in Transylvania. And there are several handwritten copies. I was amazed when I found out that on the same year, in 1821, they translated the whole pamphlet. It's not that long. And they made more than 126 handwritten copies. That is the number of our congregation. So I think that the main idea was to send a copy for every single congregation to be aware that we have some sisters and brothers over the sea. Well, organized connections with American Unitarians began 10 years later in 1831, when a Transylvanian Unitarian nobleman named Sandor or Alexander Farkas visited North America. He wrote a very popular book about his voyage entitled Journey to North America. It is worthwhile to note that the book was translated into English and edited by Theodore and Helen Benedek Schoenemann. That was the beginning of the 1970s, and recently was reprinted by the permission of the American Philosophical Society. You can see there the original article page. This is the Hungarian original. The reprint edition was made possible by John Gibbons, American Unitarian Universalist minister and friend of Transylvania, honoring the transformative power of pilgrimage. Alexander Farkas' book compares the young American democracy with the degenerated social life from his own country. The book contains the very first Hungarian translation of the Declaration of Independence. It is almost natural that the volume soon became kind of a bestseller, but because of its liberal ideas, its publication was soon forbidden by the Habsburg authorities. During his voyage, Alexander Farkas met some Unitarians too, and made a report. Actually, he made two reports, one for the British and Foreigner Unitarian Association, of course written in Latin, which was published in its own land, and a second report was made for the Hungarian or Transylvanian Unitarian Church. I'm very convinced that Alexander Bellamy, as the first Hungarian and Unitarian who traveled first in Great Britain and then North America, had the role of an accredited diplomat of the Transylvanian Unitarian Church, reanalyzing his reports as well the minutes of the British and Foreigner Unitarian Association. I came to the conclusion that Bellamy may have been financially supported by his friend and traveling companion, Count Bailey, but he was spiritually and intellectually supported by the greater Unitarian community. In the United States of America, for instance, one of his acquaintances was the secretary of the American Unitarian Association, Reverend Henry Ware Jr., who had sent the first letter to his brothers in Kolozsvár in Transylvania. In a letter dated November 14, 1831, and addressed to Alexander Farkas, Henry Ware Jr. proposed to the representatives of the Transylvanian Unitarian Church to keep a regular correspondence in the future. He described to the Transylvanians the development and history of American Unitarianism. He also sent a letter to a high school teacher in which he stated that some years earlier the American Unitarian Association had already decided to get in touch with the Transylvanians or with the Unitarians from Transylvania, and instructed that professor to turn for further information to Alexander Farkas. I don't know whether Farkas or Molnos, the professor, ever answered the letter. According to Professor Molnos, he did answer in Latin, of course, and had it sent to Farkas to be mailed to USA. I assume the letter never reached Ware, or there are no published copies of it in the American journals. 10 years after the formal April 1841, the Bishop Nicholas Székely was visited by Reverend George Sandor, who is said to have been the younger brother of the statesman Charles Sandor. He was traveling around the world, and I know very little about the outcome of this Transylvanian visit. However, the minutes mentions that George Sandor met the bishop, who presented him with a beautiful copy of a Latin book, a Unitarian theological tract. That is here in one of the American libraries. The contemporary Hungarian press did not write about the visitor either, so it would be challenging to find out if George Sandor wrote any diary or memoir. I don't know. Transylvanian connections with American Unitarians radically changed in 1868 when a missionary named Charles Dahl, actually his wife is most famous than he was, is Caroline Dahl, the daughter of Boston. She kept a diary till the end of his life. There are that much of writings, and she's well known. And Charles is quite known in UU circles as well. Well, as a missionary, he worked in India, and on his way back to United States, he visited Kolozsvár. He stayed for 2 weeks, and during that time he got acquainted with Hungarian-speaking Unitarians by going from parish to parish in the company of a professor from the seminary. In the festive hall of the high school, he delivered a lecture about India and about Unitarianism in the United States, which was followed with great interest by the Unitarians from Kolozsvár. The leaders of the church seized the opportunity to send a letter to the American Unitarian Association, which was considered so important that it was published in its entire length in the monthly journal, 1868. This was the first English letter written by our fellows. The letter was dated May 20, 68, and in it the Transylvanians expressed their regret that in spite of all their efforts, so far they failed to get in touch with the American Unitarian Association. But at the same time, they said that they hope this would change in the future. Let me quote just a short fragment which I find characteristic. Quote, "The works of your eminent men, among them Dr. Channing and Theodore Parker, are read with pleasure here. And these move our hearts towards you in salvation of cordial affection. As Unitarian Christians, we especially congratulate you on the liberation of your 4 millions of slaves. We thank God for your early protest as a body against the great national sin." End of quote. Having heard that the Unitarians from Hungary were about to celebrate the 300th anniversary of the existence of the church, the executive committee of the AUA requested Reverend Fred Hatch, then in Europe, to represent the association on that occasion, even before they knew about the above-mentioned letter and about Dahl's visit, so it was kind of 2 letters crossing each other. Well, they sent a note written in Hungarian, in a broken Hungarian, as broken is my English, in which they greeted their co-religionists. And on the same letter, they offered to bear the expenses of the translations of Channing's books into Hungarian and German. And quote, as a return for what they received from the writings of the Polish and Hungarian forefathers. The letter was signed by Charles Lowy, the secretary of the American Unitarian Association. The offer was readily accepted in Kolozsvár. The Council of the Representatives answered in a long epistle describing in detailed way how the 300th anniversary took place. Just keep in mind that we consider that our church was founded in 5068 with the Edict of Torda, so that is the birthday. And for the very first time in our history, we celebrated 300 years since the foundation in 1868. And then the second celebration was 1968. And hopefully, the third celebration will be, we are already preparing for it in 2018, which would be the 450th anniversary of our church. Well, concerning Channing and the translation, they wrote the following. For this purpose, for the universalization of the pure gospel of Jesus, we regard as a very important factor the translation and publication of the works of Dr. Channing and other excellent American Unitarians into Hungarian and German languages. This, however, we have already begun to carry out. From the writings of Dr. Channing and other eminent Unitarians, we have up to this time translated several and published them in our periodical, the Christian Seed Sower. It is the oldest Hungarian theological periodical. Its first issue came out in 1861. Recently we celebrated 150 years and I'm the chief editor of it. And they continue, therefore we look with joy towards the publication of eminent American works selected and sent by you. In the same letter, the Hungarians mention their boldest 19th century project, which is, quote, according to our opinion, this purpose, universalization of pure gospel of Jesus, would be, the most part, be approached if we could at once build a chapel or any place of worship in Pest, the capital of our country, and those from a congregation in the center to direct and consolidate the religious thoughts of man. It's kind of sexist language, but it's 19th century. These plans concerning translation and erecting a church building in Budapest, mark the beginning of a stronger connection with the American Unitarians. First, this meant just sending and receiving letters regularly, but after some years, actual visits took place. In the 1870s, Channing finally could be read in Hungarian too. On February 21st, 1871, the Unitarian bishop, John Chrysostom, sent to America 4 copies of the first Hungarian translation of Channing works. They translated it in 5 years, 5 volumes. In the same year, he sent a letter to the American Unitarian Association, this is 1871, in which, besides other things, he wrote the following. I can't thank you enough for your generosity, which made us much stronger. We know that the best way to express our gratitude is to make generally known here in the eastern countries the brightest star of your flag, spiritual freedom and pure ideas of religion and morality. Now, as the tree Magi, we too have seen your stars and we shall never stop respecting it. End of quote. In 1873, an important event took place in Budapest, which had a decisive influence on the development of the Unitarian Hungarian-American connections. On the occasion of the World Exhibition held in Vienna, an Anglo-American delegation came to Budapest for a meeting. They were the following: Edward Everett Hale from New York, the famed author and editor and chaplain of the US Senate, and John Fratwell Jr., a tradesman and member of the Council of the British and Foreigner Unitarian Association. And there was a lady called Emma Southwich. Unfortunately, I know nothing else about her, just the name. Present on behalf of the Transylvanian Unitarians were Daniel Shimin and John Kovacs, both professors at the Theological Academy of Kolozsvár. The meeting proved to be a fruitful one. In the following 2 decades, the American Unitarian Association kept sending large sums of money to support the building of the Unitarian Church at Budapest. Actually, they were not successive in erecting the building, but the American Unitarian Association and the British and Foreigner Unitarian Association was able to pay a full salary for a settled minister in Budapest. And this is how the whole Budapest congregation started and the Budapest mission started to exist. Now going back to the war trade. John Kovacs accompanied the guests back to Vienna, and he continued to make efforts to find some other Americans and maybe British Unitarians who would have been interested in the building of a church. He tried to convince 2 American gentlemen, Jackson Schultz, the American High Commissioner of the exhibition, and Hamilton Hill, the representative of Massachusetts. I don't know if he was successful in his attempt, but it is a fact that Edward Hale and John Fratwell remained devoted friends of Transylvanian Unitarians. Fratwell visited our second high school, which is located in Székelykeresztúr, in 1875, and he donated some money, so the school was able to finish the building. They were finishing the building, and there is this commemorative flag as you enter the gate of the old school, which commemorates Fratwell. And there are a few lines written by Fratwell, which begins with, "Faith is the spring of action." That is the motto of the college. Our colleges have their own flag. The motto of the Kolozsvár flag is Musis et Virtutibus, Muses and Virtues, which is quite pagan, but I love it. And the motto of the Székelykeresztúr school is "Faith is a spring of action." And it is sewed on the flag. So you can see it. They still keep remembering Fratwell. Had it not been the enthusiasm of Edward Hale and John Fratwell, the year 1874 might have brought a sort of disinterest for the Hungarian Unitarian cause. In 1874, the American Unitarian Association promised to grant $2,000 for 2 years in order to be able to employ 2 more teachers in the high school in Kolozsvár. But collecting money proved to be more difficult than Transylvanians had imagined. Fratwell wrote about these difficulties. I quote him: "Most of Americans find it unreasonable to help Transylvania, as long as we also have our problems in the West. The truth is that your country is known here only from some German descriptions, which are not really describing it favorably. I have really tried to make the Americans change their ideas and give up their prejudices concerning Transylvania. I have written many articles in the most different papers. If the Americans can be convinced that you really use their money in a way which would meet their requirements, I'm sure more will be willing to help. End of quote. Most probably, the Americans were convinced because they did not stop helping Hungarian-speaking Unitarians generously, even in their most difficult years. Not only was the American Unitarian Association willing to support Hungarian Unitarianism, but private person did too. I feel it my duty to mention the name of a lady called Anne Richmond from Providence. In her letter, written in March 1875, she offered $7,000 to establish a science chair at the Unitarian High School in Kolozsvár. The sum was placed in a bank in the USA, and $500 were sent every year as the salary of the teacher, as long as the money lasted. This news was received with great excitement at Kolozsvár, and they immediately organized the department called Anne Richmond. Her portrait is hanged on our room of the chief consistory. And there are two women. One is Anne Richmond and another one is a Hungarian benefactor. Well, the teacher of this new chair became a young physician who taught biology, physiology, and zoology in the school. And this endowment lasted till the end of the First World War, and because of the Treaty of Trianon, everything was gone and lost. Due to Edward Hale and John Fretwell, the American Unitarian Association sent $2,000 to. This money was used to create. This money was used for creating the Priestley and Channing departments in the high school. However, the freshly elected Bishop Joseph Ferenc felt it important. Sorry. Okay. I was rushing a bit. Joseph Ferenc felt it important, you will see him later, to state in a letter written on November 28, 1865, I quote, "Taking into consideration the huge sum of money spent by the American Unitarian Association for missionary purposes in India or Australia, I don't think that those $2,000 meant to support Hungarian Unitarianism would be wasted money. Isn't it just as important to maintain and strengthen what we already have as it is to conquer new domains?" Well, the lobbying was not in vain. The Americans kept helping those two departments until the First World War. The Transylvanians kept in touch with the secretaries of the American Unitarian Association, who, of course, wrote their letters to the Hungarian Unitarians on behalf of the association. Similarly, at Kolozsvár, a committee was undertaking the task of keeping up the foreign connections. Of course, not only the secretaries of the AUA were writing letters, but other people too. I think I will skip over some unimportant parts and then move a bit. One key figure of our connections is, or worked on building new connections, is named. His name is John Kovacs. We are not relatives. He studied languages and philosophy at the University of Zurich, and later enrolled in Manchester New College, London. After completing 2 years of studies in England, he returned home in 1872 and began to teach history and English in the Unitarian High School in Kolozsvár. Popularization of English language and literature in Transylvania was favored by the foundation of the Royal Joseph Ferenc University, founded in 1862. On April 1873, the board of the University of Kolozsvár entitled John Kovacs to teach English language and literature at the university. He was the first university instructor in English language and literature until his death, 1905. He was followed by one more Unitarian, George Boros, professor of theology and later Unitarian bishop. He lectured at the university from 1905 to 1919. Unitarians proved to be indispensable in organizing the English language department at the Royal University of Kolozsvár. The last teacher was named László Csifó, and he taught right till the end of the Second World War. In October 1865, John Kovacs published in the local daily papers an appeal for the foundation of the English Conversation Club for, I quote, improving English speaking and writing skills. Cultivation of English languages at Kolozsvár started in the 1840s in the English Reading Club, founded by this Englishman, John Paget. The proposal made by John Kovacs was a continuation of Paget's work. The English Reading and the English Conversation Club had been working side by side until 1887. The English Conversation Club of Kolozsvár had an important role all over Hungary because it was the single English club which had been working without an interruption. The main purpose of the club was to teach and to develop knowledge of English language. Therefore, the members get together once a week to study the language, to read English newspaper, to listen to different lectures, and of course to talk exclusively in English. It was the rule that the members of the club had to use English language whenever they met, not just during the club activities. In 1881, during the diplomatic journey in London, John Kovacs met Joseph Henry Allen, church historian at Harvard Divinity School. At the invitation of John Kovacs, Allen followed him to Hungarian Transylvania and published a report about his journey in the Christian Register and the Unitarian Review. His cordial and impartial narrative appeared as a pamphlet in the late autumn of 1881 under the title A Visit to Transylvania at the Consistory and the Consistory at Kolozsvár. Some British Unitarians visited Kolozsvár as well, and they wrote their reports about their impressions. So there are several pamphlets. Allen's presence renewed the Hungarian-American relationship. Receiving an invitation from the American Unitarian Association, and because of Joseph Allen's encouragement, the Hungarian Church decided to send John Kovacs to the American Unitarian Association conference at Saratoga. Allen had returned to the United States, and in several public meetings he stressed the importance of the Hungarian Unitarian Church in Eastern Middle Europe. Then John Kovacs was the second Unitarian after Sandor who visited United States. He embarked in Liverpool on the same year, we are in 1881. So he embarked in Liverpool, and after 12 long days of sailing, he finally arrived in Boston. According to his memoir, all the way along they were navigating in storm, and he had suffered so much in 10 days that it was enough for a lifetime. He arrived in Saratoga with 1 day delay on September 19, and the next day he made a speech to approximately 3,000 Unitarians. In his speech he pointed out that the New England and Transylvania are situated on the same latitude, and the Unitarians from the two countries are alike in their open-mindedness. He also managed to connect the past of the two countries. I quote from his report. The Hungarian Unitarian Church had already enjoyed its golden age when the wood of Mayflower wasn't even touched by the axes of the woodcutters. Since then, Unitarianism and power had turned towards West. Now West is sending back a rich treasure of enthusiasm and ideas and tries to stimulate the old countries. I have to confess, continues Kovacs, that I felt very touched when I realized how great is this nation and country, how civilized is the audience which is listening to me. Thank you. The United States is a new world. Its people are the first of all nations of the world, considering freedom and progress. Being your guest and being a Hungarian, I'm very glad to see your proficiency and your bright future. End of quote, but this is what I think about. Then he mentioned the journey of Alexander Farkas-Bölöni, the influence of his book and the cordial reception of Louis Kossuth and his exiled companions, the hero of the Hungarian Revolution. Quote, the Hungarians didn't forget these facts, and they will always be grateful for the hospitality. Period. I'm the member of a free nation who had begun guarding in the eastern part of Europe the same civil liberties as you are sustaining in the western part of the earth, giving example for the whole Europe and for the whole world. My nation greets your sons and daughters who are great in science, rich in trade, and excellent in industry, and who, just like the ancient Romans, are predestined to take leading part in civilization of the world. I assure you that we love freedom more than our country, more than our friends, or even more than our life, just like you do. Kossuth, when he stayed in New England, said, be great on the earth. I say the same thing. Be masters of the seas, civilizer of the world, and the glory of humanity. End of quote. After the conference in Saratoga ended, Kovacs' American tour had begun. On September, he went to Peterborough, and then he went to Cambridge. He attended various events in the surroundings of Boston, held lectures in which he presented the history and the structure of the Unitarian Church and the educational institutions of the Unitarian Church as well. In Northeastern, he got acquainted with the Ames family. He wrote the following about his experiences with the Ames. I quote, "This is the American spirit. In America, if somebody makes money, his moral duty will be to subscribe to a charity. The main characteristic of the American Unitarians is their interest for encouraging the local culture. I was personally convinced about this fact in every little town or village." End of quote. Kovacs continued his journey to Providence, then he went to Newport, then Cambridge, and then he headed for Canada. After visiting Montreal, Toronto, Buffalo, Detroit, Ann Arbor, he arrived in Chicago. Paid a short visit in Madison, and he started for St. Louis, and then Cincinnati and Cleveland followed. In Midville, he visited the Unitarian Theological Seminary, he gave a lecture and went on to Washington, where he met the president and the minister of culture. His next station were Baltimore, Philadelphia, and New York. On January 1st, he arrived back in Cambridge. Then he went to Boston and preached in the parishes of the Boston area. He preached in 28 churches along his journey. And he returned home after a half-year-long journey. It was a big festivity when he was greeted at the train station. The students of the Unitarian College saluted him with a torchlight parade and serenaded him, and it was a big deal in Kolozsvár indeed. The next visitor in United States was George Boros. That guy. And he is Joseph Ferenc. George Boros traveled to United States at the turning of the 19th century. In fact, the American Unitarian Association celebrated 75 years of being from the foundation, and they wanted to entertain as its guest the Bishop Joseph Ferenc, but he declined the invitation, referring to his health condition and age. By the way, he lived 28 more years after that. As a triumph of Transylvanian technique, George Boros, before leaving for the 75th anniversary of the American Unitarian Association, had registered the bishop's greeting speech to a wax cylinder, which thereafter successfully was played during the meeting in Boston. It was a big deal, and they hear Bishop Joseph Ferenc greeting them in English. Well, I don't know how much they understood, like you here. This was a beautiful overture of the 20th century, followed by several mutual visits and many letters. One of the most enthusiastic supporters of Transylvania was Charles Wente, the secretary of the International Council of Liberal Religious Thinkers and Workers, which nowadays is known as the IRRF. After the First World War, Louis Craig Cornish, president of the American Unitarian Association, led a delegation to Transylvania to find lawful solutions for the Hungarian churches, which got into minority status after the Treaty of Trianon. 10 Hungarian students studied at American Unitarian colleges before the two world wars. The best known of them being Francis Balázs. During the communist regime, just 2 Transylvanians had the chance to complete their studies at Midville Lombard Theological School in Chicago. After the Iron Curtain fell, 27 Unitarian scholars studied in the United States of America. Most of them were registered at Starting School for the Ministry in Berkeley. As a result of these contacts, Transylvanian Unitarianism was reshaped, both theologically and institutionally. The evaluation and the outcome of Hungarian-American Unitarian connections is an ongoing process. At present, I could do no more but enlist some of the most interesting episodes, at least from my point of view, of our historical connections. In my doctoral thesis, I scrutinized the above-mentioned affairs, but that dissertation was written in Hungarian for Hungarians. I'm sure is it not worthwhile to translate all of it. However, a shortened version of it, included in an abbreviated history of the Transylvanian Unitarian Church, might or might not stir some interest among English-speaking Unitarians and Universalists. Questions?
Are there exchange programs for young people between Hungary and the United States, Unitarian associations?
I don't know if there are between Hungary and Unitarian churches in USA. There is some between Romania, Transylvania, and USA.
Okay.
They used to visit from time to time some congregation, and our students are attending quite regularly, well, not quite regularly, yearly, the starting school for the ministry.
Could you talk a little bit about the place of the Unitarian Church in Transylvania during the 19th century under the Habsburgs? Were they independent? Were they strong? What was the health of the church in those years?
I will answer that question in a second. You had a... Okay, I will. The Habsburgs ruled Transylvania from 1693 basically to the end, to the beginning of the First World War. And then are certain periods of time. We have to distinguish between, let's say, in between 1693 and 1781, the Transylvanian Unitarian Church faced a very, very tough time. Our church buildings were confiscated, the ministers imprisoned, Unitarianism was not in fashion at all. So it was a time of very, very deep oppression and strong oppression from the Habsburg side. Of course, they were Catholics, and which do not fit in the matrix of Catholicism should perish. And then in 1781, Joseph II decreed or enforced the so-called law of toleration, which permitted the non-Catholic churches to repair their church buildings and to erect new church buildings. But just with one condition, they could not collect money from the parishioners, because then the Austrian Empire will lose the taxes. So they wanted to keep the taxes, and they wanted the Protestants to have some freedom. So beginning with 1781, we had a much better period, although it was not the golden age of Unitarianism. You know that the Habsburgs started to, let's say, exploit more and more the former Hungary. And the Hungarians rised up against the regime that was the 48-49 revolution. And after the revolution, again, very harsh oppression was ahead from the Habsburgs. And that lasted until 1867. Sorry, vice versa. Yes, 67, as I mentioned. 1867. Well, the golden age is from 1867 to the beginning of the First World War, under the still Habsburg Empire, well, the dual monarchy. Then our membership went up to about 100,000. Was even more, a bit more than 100,000. And the Unitarians were about 1% of the whole population of the empire, which is a lot. Now we are 27 0.27% in Romania, which is not that much. And they succeeded in erecting the church building in Budapest. You who had been in Budapest, you remember it's that nice building behind the parliament, which was built during this period. And then the First World War turned everything upside down. And then after the communist regime. So the whole history of Unitarianism is kind of oppression, and then just a short period of a deep breath, and then again oppression, and then again a deep breath to have some strength for the next oppression. I don't know if
Thank you, that's great.
that satisfies you.
The relationship with other Protestant groups, like, well, I don't know, but there are, I think in Slovakia, there's the Church of the Brethren, for example, some of these smaller Protestant sects, and I'm wondering, under communism, for example, I suppose there was a certain brotherhood between Unitarians and other religious minorities, correct?
Yeah, the relationship with the other Protestant churches is quite good, and even with non-Protestant churches as well. Keep in mind that we are minority. We are Hungarians, so whoever is Hungarian doesn't matter, is brother and sister, even if they are Catholics. As Protestants, we have one seminary, one Protestant seminary, and we train our ministers or young students for ministry in the same seminary for Reformed, Lutheran, and Unitarians. So it's more than an ecumenical relation. It's not just about big smile. It's about surviving or perishing together. This is the issue, really.
What is it like now? What is the situation like now?
It is, I think it is improving. There are some signs which are encouraging. Meantime, a lot of things do not depend on the Unitarians or on the Reformed body or on the Orthodox Church. There are certain social, economical issues which, if the country is in and is on the middle, then it fits or it doesn't fit anyone. But we are on the same basket, how you call it? Bucket, all of us. Well, I used to say if I cut one of my fingers, it's on my hand. It doesn't matter if it's the last one or the first one. It hurts my whole body. It's kind of the same situation. Sorry if it does not make sense or it's not a direct answer to your question.
After the fall of the wall in '89 and the uprising in Timisoara and all of that, there was a lot of reaction, the Romanians against the Hungarian minority, and I'm wondering if that has eased, and if with Romania going into the EU, if there's any changes as far as the general population acceptance of Unitarians, or if that doesn't matter because they're so small. And also, do you get any support from the EU as a minority, within a minority?
Let's start with the so-called change and the tensions between the two ethnicities. Those changes were made artificially by different political groups. The first thing was that the so-called secret police, bad famed Securitate, stopped to exist in the beginning of the 90s. and they wanted to be in power again. And then they organized that riot and that fight between Hungarians and Romanians in Budapest to prove to anyone that they are badly needed. There is need of a secret police again, and then they could keep, or they could control everything in the country. And even now, when there is a year when we face elections, then the tensions, of course, increase. Not because I change my mind towards my Romanian friends, or they change their minds towards myself, but because there are different political interests from both sides. And then they start to gain more votes, making these tensions. I think this is how politics works everywhere in the world. The situation, however, is much better than it was like on the beginning of the 90s. The European Union helps the minorities, not as a church, not as a body, as Unitarians, but for instance, if you write a project and you have some good lobby behind you, you need that as well. Then you might get some money from the European Union to restore your 700-year-old church.
As a historical building.
As a historical building. So it has nothing to do with religion. It's as a historical building.
Sandor.
Just a second, please.
Hi, Sandor. My name is Chila Browser.
Oh.
And I will see you tomorrow. Thank you for your
Köszönöm szépen,
presentation.
nagyon sajnálom ezt a rettenetes.
And I just wanted to say that I was invited to Temesvár just now in December to celebrate the 25th anniversary of that event by László Tőkés. And it's very sad to see that he wasn't even invited to any of the celebrations that the Romanians had to celebrate the event of getting rid of the communist regime. So there is quite a friction, even though the EU helps alleviate some of the problems, but unfortunately the ethnic issues are still very strong and very dividing there. There was one Romanian speaker that they invited for this celebration, and that was about it. But no Hungarians were invited to any of the Romanian celebrations because they're worried that people will speak up. And definitely László Tőkés is not shy to speak up and advocate for the Hungarians in Transylvania. But nonetheless, it was a wonderful event and celebration, and he's considered the spark that started the whole thing.
Well, every generation writes its own history, and usually the revolutions eat their own or digest their own children. And well, that. I think in Transylvania, and I'm talking just about Transylvania, things are improving. There are more and more Romanians who are very proud of their Transylvanian identity and the multicultural identity of Transylvania. And they are fed with the South and with the politics which we inherited from the back and from the Turks.
Yes, Sandor, going back to the 19th century, I'm interested in the English language club that you talked about. From your understanding of the history, was that a unique situation, or did such clubs exist in other places?
It was unique. There were 3 clubs, as I know. That's quite interesting. No one wrote except my humbleness this subject. There were a club in Kolozsvár. That club lasted till the end of the First World War.
So from
from 80-70 something, 80-77 till the end. Then it was a club in Budapest. They met once a month, but then there are gaps in between their meetings and years. And then it was a club in Bratislava. I published there the rules of the clubs in my book in English. And there are mostly the same rules in all the clubs, except that Kolozsvár had a good reputation. I mean, because of the Unitarian connection, and because that it was a body who really knew the language, and they were a fan of the British culture, and later of the Americans. They really kept this club going, and there were visitors from all over the world, from New Zealand to Australia, and from all over. Whoever passed Kolozsvár, then they went to the club, had a lecture, met the guys, and they had just fun.
Were all the members of the club in Kovacs Unitarian?
No, they were, part of them were professors of the university, the newly founded university. There were quite a few Jews, and I think all religions were represented. Well, they were intellectuals. They were all intellectuals, and the problem is that I was unable to find and to discover, and I researched every corner of the local and even national archives, the minutes of the clubs. So what I did basically was to take the journals from 80-77 to the end of the war. There are 5 major journals, and then go day by day, and whenever I got English club, make a note. What happened, who visited, what they did. That was how I uncovered the history of this club.
Were the members of the English club all men?
Yes, on the beginning. But they changed the rules, I think in 1901. And then they accepted women. And even on the board, they accepted women and they shared the power, half and half. And of course, the daughter of János Kovacs was one of the leading figures.
Was it a large group?
About 20, 25. They were involved, those 25 members, in all kinds of club activities. But whenever a stranger or a visitor from far away showed up, then it was a big feast. They knew about, the intellectuals and the church leaders. So it was a great banquet, and then they just toasted for, I don't know, civil liberties, for New Zealand, for the Queen. Whoever doesn't matter, just.
I think we've reached a conclusion, but I want to thank you for your presentation tonight, Sandor, on behalf of everybody. And for all of you who've been here, thank you for being here. Sandor again will be here in the foot room Saturday at 10 o'clock. Different presentation, more general about the history of development of Unitarianism in Transylvania. And for any of you who are interested or thinking about the upcoming pilgrimage in the summer, this Saturday program will be particularly useful, I think, in giving you a good introduction to what you might expect there. So, Sandor, of course, is preaching on Sunday also.